like to welcome you all here in person and those of you tuning in online to this event, Buddhism and Social Justice, an interview with Dr. Santosh Raut. So I'd like to thank our sponsors to be the first thing. That would be the Religious Studies Department here at MSU, also the Asian Studies Center, and the Folio MSU Folio Speaker Series on spirituality. So a number of people have come together for this. Thank you also to members of the community who have come up from Detroit and who set up a display in the background and have some books there to distribute after our event. So I'm John Coiney. I'm an associate professor in religious studies. I work on South Asia especially, and I'm currently working on a project on transnational Buddhism and Ambedkarite migration. So that's part of how I've been interacting with people. My esteemed guest here is Professor Santosh Raut, who currently is a fellow in the Buddhist Ministry Initiative at Harvard University. He's also an associate professor of aesthetics and philosophy at the English and Foreign Languages University in Hyderabad, and he's the academic director of the Nagarjuna Training Institute, also known as Nagaloka in Nagpur, which is an Ambedkarite Buddhist center for education. A lot of undergraduates and people from the community, not only from central India, but from around the entire country, and some even from outside, come for education about Buddhist philosophy, and Dr. Ambedkar's teaching, community organizing, and things like that. So we are addressing online and here in the room two rather different audiences. And so that's why we have the structure of this interview that we do. We have some people who are very familiar with the Ambedkarite movement. And so some of our questions will be a little more detailed in relating to them. And then we're also anticipating that some people don't have much background at all. And so that's why we'll have some questions that will be much more basic. And yeah, we ask your patience if some things seem a little bit repetitive or some things go over some people's head. That's part of just the effect of having multiple audiences. So the format that we have here is an interview. I'll be talking with Professor Raut for about 45 or so minutes, asking him some questions that we've talked about in advance, thinking that this is a good coverage of topics. And then we'll have that followed by about 30 minutes of question and answer. People who are online, the Q&A button is live. So if you have a question, you can type that in. I'd like to thank our assistant, Manan Vyas, for helping us out with the technology and making sure the webinar is running smoothly. And yes, so anybody with a question online, please post that to the Q&A and we will get to it. Professor Raut, would you like to say a few words, just as a by way of introduction?
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Professor John. It's a great privilege, and I'm very happy and honored to be at Michigan State University. And thank you very much for joining us this evening for such an important, phenomenal story that is happening in the world, particularly in India. I'm Santosh Raut, as John already introduced me. I come from a very small village in Maharashtra, especially eastern, northeast Maharashtra, basically, district called Gondia. And I grew up in a very small village, and I finished my schooling in the village where there was a very scarcity of resources, including electricity and transport. But then I moved to Pune. I finished my degree in pharmacy. So I graduated from pharmaceutical science. And then I've been to Delhi in Jawaharlal Nehru University. I did my master's, MPhil, and PhD, which I wrote basically in British library, and a part of my thesis was research in United Kingdom. And here I'm at Harvard this year. So this is my brief.
Great, thank you very much. So we've prepared a number of questions that will hopefully bring some people, if they don't have so much background, up to speed, and then we'll get into some more depth. So Professor Raut, could you say just briefly, understanding that our time here is condensed, just a bit of introduction about the movement of how Buddhism and social justice, why these words come together for Dr. Ambedkar and his followers.
I think this is a phenomenal story. Basically, even in history of India, uh, maybe I can put a note from my personal encounter with Buddhism.
Yes.
I was in village and I have seen how students are marginalized and segregated in the village or rural area, especially, and they don't have much resources and interactive opportunities with teachers. Even today, where there are villages are not developed, and uh, it was in my childhood. I think I encountered Buddhism with a monk in my village, where there was a small vihara. So if you see the nature and the structure of Ambedkarite Buddhists today, in every locality where people who converted to Buddhism with Dr. Ambedkar, they will have a local Buddhist temple that's called viharas with a monk. And they get more confidence when they encountered Buddhism. So I think nature itself or those experiences itself speaks why Buddhism is important in their life. Because in spite of getting a good education, getting into good position, the stigma of caste still sticks to their identities in larger society and the larger social context. And the inferiority that comes with it is so deep than even those who are oppressed have realized. Uh, that stigma carries all over or throughout their lives. And Buddha's teaching or the Buddha's sort of encountering with those communities put immense confidence and the sense of liberation in their mind. So I think that's the nature of Ambedkarite or the Buddhist movement, in spite of all the struggle that Dr. Ambedkar had, forming labor movement, political parties, even constitution, is all great and wonderful gift that Dr. Ambedkar has given to the country. But in the society where it is very systematically hierarchized, I think religion plays a great role there in terms of their mental emancipation. So that's the Buddhism sort of meets with the social justice in such situations.
Well, could I ask you to say a bit more about that, considering Dr. Ambedkar's background as somebody who was active in politics, in publishing newspapers, as an attorney, as the chairman of the drafting committee for the Constitution. After all of that, at the end of his life, he converts to Buddhism. Like, why religion at all, and why Buddhism?
Yeah, I would, a very interesting question. Thank you very much. I would like to refer this question to Dr. Ambedkar's life itself. It spontaneously came in my mind. It was early months of 1956. So why 1956 is important? That's the year Dr. Ambedkar converted. So the early months of 1956, he invited a close meeting with his close associates, close colleagues, where he used to share the confidential his steps and all. And that was in Delhi. And in 56, the first government after independence supposed to have an election in next year. So they thought Dr. Ambedkar invited us for discussing the electoral strategies. And in that meeting, Dr. Ambedkar, well, it was 56, last year of his life, last 10 months of his life, which he didn't know. And he came with a very heavy body and very heavy shoulder, and his secretary carried him to the table. And with very gambhir, the word, the serious voice, he said that I'm going to declare that I'm going to embrace Buddhism. He didn't declare the place that time. And everyone was shocked. He said, Dr. Ahmed, why are you bringing religion? We all had a good fights and we are getting there and we will win the elections. and problem will be solved. So that's where his genius lies. He knew that majoritarian politics or even political structure is not enough to change the attitude of people's mind and their deep conditioning. And said, if I die and do not survive till 57, which is true, what would be the fate of my revolution? So actually he was giving a complete package, if you see what I mean, for the liberation. And they said that conditioning and the attitudinal or the notional change we refer in annihilation of caste, that needs to be accelerated than ever before. So he said, therefore, Buddha's religion or Buddha's teaching is so important in his thinking. Without it, I don't think Dr. Ambedkar's thinking sort of completes. So that's why he thought religion is important, but what religion he should have, and by scrutinizing or examining or with a close sort of study, he thought Buddhism is the best because that doesn't observe caste system, it doesn't believe in hierarchy, and it gives a liberation, freedom to people. Doesn't mean other religion doesn't give, but I think we are talking in a very specialized, unique situation that probably we need to keep in our mind when I talk about liberation and Buddhism. I don't mean that other religion doesn't teach liberation.
Mhm. Well, could you say a bit more about what makes Dr. Ambedkar's vision of Buddhism sort of unique or special? Because obviously we've got a very socially turned orientation here.
Yeah.
Yeah, could you say more about that?
Yes. Yes. Often Buddhism traditionally understood as a process of self-transformation, which is important. We can't change others unless we transform ourselves. So raising the level of consciousness is important, but it's also equally important. The raised consciousness or the elevated mind must look around the world and address the suffering, what Buddha would call the compassion. So wisdom is important, but Buddha's life himself, when he attained enlightenment, he did not sit under the tree experiencing his bliss throughout his life. He walked till the age of 80 and by bare feet, probably till entire northern India. So I think that's the response is inevitable. So Dr. Ambedkar sort of emphasized that it's very important to have the aspect of social transformation or the philanthropic aspect of religion, that we should respond to the suffering around us. Suffering is not mere personal or philosophical or theoretical condition that everything is changing. This brick wall will change one day and there is suffering. There is social suffering, there is poverty, there is economy, there is inequality, there is discrimination. So these are very sort of living suffering. In fact, Dr. Ambedkar called untouchability is a living untouchability, which lives in people's mind. So I think very important to address when you nullify your prejudices, that to share with the larger community and the society to impetus the process of social transformation on the basis of non-violence and justice. So I think that's where the very unique feature. And if we see in the aspects of his thinking, it was 26 November 1950 when he gave a, a constitution to the president. And his first constitution assembly talk of handing over Indian constitution, he said something very important. He said that an experience of democracy is not new to Indian civilization. It was very much existed in Buddha's Sangha. So mere quoting is not enough. If I unfold Dr. Ambedkar's thought there, I see his genius to link that thought with the ancient wisdom, which was very much prevailed, and he was sort of revitalizing that experience in Indian mind, what democracy means. It should be based on liberty, equality, and fraternity. In fact, he says in BBC interview in 1954, I learned those principles from my master, the Buddha, not from French Revolution. So words are not enough. I think I would say the linking those spirits with the ancient Buddhist wisdom and therefore defining the democracy on that basis is another very important saline feature of Dr. Ambedkar's Buddhism. He relates that with the democracy. And third aspect is he believes that on the basis of Dhamma, a new relationship can be established. The old way of thinking, we can sort of cease to see other person lower or higher. Women or men, equality between men and women, and equality among men. That's what he defines. So not on the basis of caste or gender or economic hierarchy, but on the basis of humanity. That's the another feature. In fact, he says that democracy is not merely a form of government. It's associated living. Is the conjoined experience where each citizen have a feeling of respect and reverence for another citizen. In fact, I recently encountered he has planned an interview with the New York Times in 1950, where he was supposed to discuss the future of democracy in India. And there he used the word called democracy is an attitude of mind. So I think he was by launching or by defining democracy, he is aspiring towards the deep democracy, the fundamental change in civil society, in people's mind and the attitude, the way they relate and connect with each other. So that's very important feature.
Well, in doing this, though, he also has some ideas about Buddhism that, being so socially turned, are a little bit different than other popular images of Buddhism, such as the doctrine of karma.
Yeah.
And could you say a little more about some things that he applies in different ways in the modern time?
Yes, it's a deep question. And doctrine of karma. Often karma is ritualistic in the old system of karma niyama or karma theory. So, for example, if I pick up an example from his political, not opponent, but the person who was he's dealing with, Gandhi, he believed in Varna Ashrama Dharma. So Varna means the color or the clan where you born in. Ashrama means to dwell, and that's your dharma. So on the basis of that Varna, you have assigned duties, and that's your karma. That's the definition of karma according to the old religion.
But even among Buddhists,
Yeah.
there is a doctrine of karma
Yes.
that's not exactly the same as what Dr. Ambedkar is.
Exactly. So that's the difference. He sort of redefines that. And in fact, in Buddha and His Dhamma, which is a book available here, he cites the first verse of Dhammapada while defining karma. He cites the Buddha saying that someone becomes, if you act skillfully, your mind becomes skillful and you become happy. And if you are unskillful, your mind become unskillful. So negative deeds or negative karmas shrinks your mind, and skillful kusala karma opens your mind. So likewise, he says that it's a scientific relation with the karma. If I act unskillfully with even lower caste, I don't think that will, yes, it massages my ego to some extent. I am higher, but as a human, I don't think a human would like to oppress others on the basis of karmas that you are assigned on the basis of birth. That's the exact connection that goes even with rebirth. So I'm reborn, or someone reborn, woman or untouchable, because they have did some bad karmas. I don't think Buddha believed in that. Buddha believed in becoming or rebirth is a concept even in Buddhism, but the word is a punarjanma is replaced by the punarbhava. Bhava means to become. So, like you started listening my interview or our conversation, it's a process of becoming within your mind right now, and it's a changing process. That's what Buddha was addressing, and Ambedkar was uh, trying to communicate the theory of karma. So it's a dynamic force than this static duty.
Well, and he talks about a number of things in new ways, including what the role of monks and nuns in contemporary society.
Yeah.
And as he gets thinking about these concepts and transforming them, applying them in new ways, he then still passes away 7 weeks after he converts. So what kind of effects did this have on his legacy and his followers, that there were only 7 weeks there between his conversion and his death?
I must submit here that it's so unfortunate that he died just after 7 weeks of his conversion. And even in last period of his life, he wrote voluminous books. There are 21 volumes and more to come, the unpublished writing. But he also wrote a very small book called Buddha Puja Path during the same time. So when I was reading that book, it's a small book like small catechism. So he wrote that small book, and he was defining the Buddhist culture. What should be recited? What sutta you should recite? It's not just a random collection of suttas and compiled in a small book. He was trying to educate what kind of Buddhist culture he wants. So that's at very simple ritual level about how to perform marriages or your housewarming ceremonies and so on and so forth. Now you would wonder why this is important. This is important because in a caste systematic structured society, everything is signatured by upper caste or priest or a Brahmin. So they have to come and do the worship. Otherwise, it's not sanctioned. Marriage, birth, death, everything. So I think fair enough to have those rituals, and we do all have rituals in every society, but that doesn't mean that in rituals I observe the caste or I observe the hierarchy. That is something not acceptable to Dr. Ambedkar and his followers. So I think that's where the story shifts. And of course, he wrote Buddha and his Dhamma. He thought that this community, the newly converted community, needs something to hold in their hand what Buddha means, what Dhamma means, and what Sangha means, and what is the body of Buddha's teachings, and so on and so forth. So, if you look at, I don't want to go into detail of Buddha and his Dhamma, but just some features of the book, he defines Buddha's background to prove that he is not a supernatural human being coming from the sky. Just to claim that this is his history, he claims none other than the son of Mahamaya and Shuddhadana, which is a parent's name. That's the point. When he goes to Dhamma section, he cites the Diksha of Brahmana, Diksha of Upali, Diksha of Navi, the scavenger, Diksha of Chandalika, the untouchable, Diksha of this Brahmana. So he is also trying to make a point that there is an inclusivity in Buddha Sangha, that he breaks down the caste barriers, and therefore is defining the various caste and the diksha or the ordination. So that's the legacy probably the followers of Dr. Ambedkar are trying to carry forward after his death. Yes, I must say that there are limitations because Dr. Ambedkar converted in challenging situation, and there is a creative tension, I would say. Shall we become a monk or not? Shall we follow monastic life or not? And of course, there are monks among Ambedkarite community. There are lamas among Ambedkarite community, and there are some Zen practitioners among Ambedkarite community. So because he could not really define what the form and the possibilities of that Buddhism would look like, I think masses have a great energy and inspiration for Buddhism, but I think it's still energy needs to uh, systematize in the form that probably Dr. Ambedkar wanted. Probably audience would ask me, don't you think that becoming a monk is an Ambedkarite Buddhist? Or becoming a Zen teacher is an Ambedkarite Buddhist? That's not my point. My point is for not to misunderstand me, I'm saying yes, great to become a monk, great to become a nun, great to become a lama, great to become a Zen teacher, and I have respect for all monastic traditions. But Ambedkarite point would be, are they really responding to the social injustices or the discriminations or the suffering around world, or are they mere focused on their own self transformating processes, which is great, but not at the cost of forgetting the world around us? There is global warming, there is environmental disaster, there is caste discrimination, there is race discrimination, economic poverty, gender discrimination, insecurities, war. World is burning. So I think our how Buddhism would respond to those living, burning situations in the world. That's the I think Dr. Ambedkarite or Dr. Ambedkar's view would be. So I think he was criticizing Sangha on that basis. There are a lot of monks, but they are not doing enough. They should be the forefront army to spread this message of peace and message of love and kindness and the non-discrimination and justice and so on and so forth. But they are focused so much on their traditions. And what they are spreading is traditions, which is great. But it should be open enough to the suffering around the world. That was his point. And he sort of says that in my Sangha, is Dr. Ambedkar Sangha, I would like to include lay men and women, and they are equally responsible to attain enlightenment. So Buddhism is not just for nuns and monks. It's equally for all the lay people or those who wanted to attain enlightenment. That's the Buddhist position of Dr. Ambedkar.
A lot of what you're saying here reminds me of a conversation that we've had earlier where very helpfully for me, you described a lot of Ambedkarite individuals, as operating between somewhere of two poles of politics and religion, including having a very large number of Ambedkarites who are not Buddhist, or some who are Buddhist in a more political identity type way, but not engaged with religion, over to then a lot of what we've been talking about that's much more engaged with religion. Could you say a little about that?
I think it's a very important paradox. It's extremely significant paradox. First of all, if I go back to even Ambedkar's time of conversion itself, it was a high time when Marxist, Leninist, Maoist movement at its peak. So in 1956, when he went to Nepal to address the audience, and the king of Nepal asked him to deliver a talk on Buddhism and communism. And I was thinking, why communism? Why not any other tradition or monasticism and Buddhism and modern world? Why communism? Because entire Asian or East Asian region was in the swing of what Indian generally or in India refers to leftist wing or communist socialist ideas. And Dr. Ambedkar was deeply aware, well, good to have liberal ideas and progressive ideas, but not at the basis of violence. Not at the basis of violence. So, and he was very strictly against the violence or using the violence even as a force to transform the society. So, I think in political assertions, well, of course, it's a lot of violence is involved. And Dr. Ambedkar was trying to throw a light on the perspective of politics that could be humanitarian and non-violent. And sort of politics should be inspired by the unification of, of society than the dividing communities on the basis of religion or uh, communal groups, dividing communal groups. That's not the politics probably Dr. Ambedkar was expecting. That's first thing. Second thing, if you see the political assertions in India, especially, instead, his followers, instead of turning into violence, they turn showing this flag and raising the flag of this flag. So they raise this flag, and those flag by default represent non-violence. So they don't provoke violence. They assert, but they assert with constitutional means. That's the another feature we see in the politics. And third point I wanted to make here, which is a more theoretical but deeper point to unfold Dr. Ambedkar's thought. What I think, if we try to change the politics or society without the substantial experience of spiritual, let's say, as you mentioned, I would call it dhammic or something deeper, we might call it even divine, whatever. Without that experience, the change in the society will be at surface. We will not change the fundamental attitude of people because we do not have the depth what we wanted to share. And that was the main point why Dr. Ambedkar said, even in Buddha and Future of His Religion, I want a monk communicating this to the community, the teachings that will transform them unbiasedly, without discrimination. And they should be a guide to the society. So that will be change at surface without deeper experience of the Buddhist teaching. On the another pole or another side of the paradox, if we become too much self-centered by spiritual and divine and ignoring the fact uh, that will be self-centered and individualistic notion of Buddhism. I think Dr. Ambedkar is wise to sort of balance this when he is asserting or linking Buddhism with constitution or politics or democracy or how the, what would I say, a state should be run by the king and so on and so forth. He cites all those examples. So that's the balance Dr. Ambedkar was trying to bring in social or political with spiritual or religious or Buddhism.
Do you feel that a lot of Ambedkarite Buddhists today kind of capture that middle way, or are they engaged in a wide variety of things? I mean, maybe a way of addressing this is like, what sort of practical things are Ambedkarite Buddhists involved in today that reflects their understanding of this dynamic move between politics and spirituality?
You asked me a difficult question. I would say not enough, if you see what I mean, honestly. But there are processes and there is progress that they, the follower of Dr. Ambedkar, sort of not enough attention has been given to his Buddhist vision to transform society. Education, the mantra Dr. Ambedkar gave, brought a lot of positive and the welfare to his community or his followers. And I'm here because of education. I think some of my friends here are because of education. But the institutional or empirical education is not enough. There is a tendency to fall into materialistic or the luxurious temptation of the life when you achieve that. And I think very importantly, Dr. Ambedkar said in 1956 at Agra, the educated people betrayed me. And he was heavy-heartedly delivered that statement because he was expecting by education what they meant they will also educate themselves, cultivating their mind. Food for tummy is not important. We need food for mind, and that's what he has catered Buddhism to the community to cultivate their own mind, which is a fundamental aim. So I think because of they are educated, there are people who are going to meditation retreats like Vipassana, or they go founded by Goenka Guruji. They are going to there is Buddhist Society of India who is active and trying to spread the awareness about uh, why conversion, why Dr. Ambedkar converted, and so on and so forth. There is also a presence of Triratna Bauddha Mahasangha in India, who is very active among newly converted Buddhists to have a structured retreats, to have sort of fundamental teachings to communicate practices, rituals, and so on and so forth. So these are the very obvious indicators that his community follow. For example, you will see this is called the Panchashila flag. So if you go to communities, you will see the flag on their houses. If they structure their house, they have a Buddhist architectural elevation on their houses. So it's a very obvious identity remarks that we see how do they try to follow. But of course, going deeper into Dhamma, going deeper into the Buddhist vision of Dr. Ambedkar, that's a process which is not really gone or accelerated enough to understand the penetrative side of Dr. Ambedkar's radical Buddhist vision, I would say.
Well, maybe that's a good transition to be thinking about how institutionally you, specifically you, try to lead this forward at a place like Nagaloka, the Nagarjuna Training Institute. What can you describe some of the programs that are happening there and maybe some of the challenges that that institution in Nagpur faces?
Right. I think thank you for asking that. We have set up this institute before 40 years. It's an outcome of this churning of Ambedkar and Buddhism that entwine together. So we have set up this institute called Nagarjuna Training Institute, where we invite students all over the India. They stay there for 9 months residential. So they learn fundamental Buddhism, fundamentals in Buddhism, fundamental meditation practices. They learn how to communicate the Buddhist mode of communication or non-violent mode of communication, and they learn some rituals too, and social work, the social side or transformative side of Dr. Ambedkar's vision of Buddhism. They learn that we charge nothing, we charge zero money, we look after them, their health, their education, they have regular classes. If I try to describe their day, they wake up around 6 o'clock, they meditate, then they have breakfast, and then classes, and in the afternoon some rest and some working period on the campus, and in the evening there are some group discussions, and night before they go to bed, post dinner they have Vandana, Buddha Vandana, and then they go to bed. So that's the day look like for their program. Apart from this, we also run the undergraduate program, which is specialized in Pali, fundamentals in Buddhism, and Dr. Ambedkar thought and social work. So these are the main focus of undergraduate program. Apart from this undergraduate program, we celebrate important Buddhist festivals. Of course, Dhammachakra Pravartan, we call it the day when Dr. Ambedkar converted to Buddhism. We celebrate that. Dr. Ambedkar's birthday, which is coming in next month, and Buddha Jayanti, the day of enlightenment of Buddha. So these are the important events we have. And I also organize important seminars, summer school and winter school for focus students, those who are interested in research, those who wanted to go advance in studies. So I organize the summer and winter school for them, on the various theme, like who is the Buddha, what is Shramanic traditions, or what is the meaning of Sangha, and so on and so forth. So these are the various activities we do, which is having a now impact on community. They educate and they establish small viharas or go to viharas and try to contribute when they go back to their hometown.
Well, and at least based on my experience at Nagaloka, you have also very extensive international connections.
Right.
And during the pandemic, you were also very active in transforming that campus into something quite different.
Yes, yes. Thank you very much. Yeah, for reminding me of that. So, as an aspect of social and charity on transforming community, during pandemic, we converted our hostel into COVID hospital, and of course, COVID brought up so many things up in the world. All the undercurrents came out. So also the caste undercurrent came out, and they were lacking of oxygen supply in India, especially the slums and the communities where there are poor people or the caste marginalized people who could not get facilities. So we open up hostels for that. I'm very thankful that some of my friends from ANA is here. They helped us to install the oxygen plant. ANA means American Ambedkar Association of North America. That's ANA. Thank you. And they helped in their collaboration to establish that. But what I wanted to make a point is very important in Ambedkar's own vision, the internationalization of Buddhism. And the article he wrote before conversion in 1950, called Buddha and Future of His Religion, he himself went to Sri Lanka, went to Myanmar, Burma, to solidify Buddhist movement and to communicate. And he sent invitation of his conversion to all Buddhist countries. What he was trying to do in his lifetime to build up international connection to support this delicate movement, I would say, and very important movement and important aspect of revival of Buddhism in various forms of socially engaged Buddhist movement in South Asia, in Southeast Asia, and now also hitting the West. So he was trying to do even before term social engaged Buddhism came into existence. He was really engaged in those, but and he also said when he was saying, when you asked earlier, the Bhikshu Sangha, the internationalized movement, international Buddhist mission, that's what he phrased it in his writing. So he was expecting that solidarity to compassionate solidarity to resolve and eradicate this inhuman, atrocious systems and the evil practices in the society, not just caste, women, or the dowry system, or the insecurity of lower caste women. These all are connected issues because caste is, the moment I say caste, it sensitizes so many different layers of discrimination and injustices. So Dr. Ambedkar was trying to solidify that by internationalizing Buddhism. I think in that sense, presence of organizations like ANA or Ambedkar International Mission or Boston Study Group or various organizations in UK or even in Hungary now is touching his thinking. So I think that's very important step forward to internationalization of Dr. Ambedkar's Buddhist mission.
Well, I think that sounds like maybe a good point to end our formal interview, and we can open things up for some questions, probably starting from the audience here, and then we'll also keep an eye on the Q&A online. So if people again have questions online, please submit them to the Q&A. So would somebody like to start us off? Yes, Jimmy.
So America is very focused on the caste system, and he mentioned like in what ways that we can abolish or reform the caste system, and as you mentioned, the violence or non-violence. Yeah, and can you talk about when it works and what are the tools or the ways to the
So the question, just for those online, is what ways did Dr. Ambedkar talk about in terms of abolishing the caste system, correct?
Yeah.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Well, of course, he was addressing the very obvious problem in front of Indian society, not just in front of him. I think everyone is suffered by caste system. Uh, 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 no one would like to see humanity on the graded inequality. So, of course, he was addressing those inequalities based on the caste. But how? In the sense, he said in his very celebrated essay called Annihilation of Caste. Caste is not like a brick wall which divides society, and it's not a wire that divides one person against another person. It's an attitude of mind, it's a notion of mind. Therefore, what, as I said, he was aspiring for a notional change. So he thought Buddha's means is the best means to nullify that notion of caste system, because Buddhists or Buddha's teaching denied caste in his own lifetime. You see what I mean? So please do not hear me that it's only Buddhism that was addressing the injustices and inequality, and only Buddhism will give a liberation. Buddhism can have, as an institutionalized religion, a problematic form. Like in other Buddhist countries, we encounter problem even with Buddhism. I think it's in a particular unique situation that Dr. Ambedkar was trying to unfold the spirit of Buddha in the sense of equality, in the sense of justice, right? And if I cite you a very interesting example in Buddha's own life, Buddha attained enlightenment, uh, and he stayed at Bodh Gaya, in that it was a dense jungle under Bodhi tree, and he addressed. He spent 7 weeks in that campus. So on the 5th week of his enlightenment, he was sitting under a tree called Ajpal Nigrodha tree. That tree name is Ajpal Nigrodha, and he was experiencing the bliss of his liberation. And a person came and disturbed his right shoulder and asked him, well, what makes a Brahmin? And in other words, he was saying, you are not entitled to attain enlightenment because you are not a Brahmin. That's the Pali Canon reads. And Buddha was gave a very wise reply, and that reply is inscribed in the stone by King Ashoka. And that stone is still there where Buddha was sitting. Ashoka erected a pillar there and wrote this, what Buddha said. And Buddha said this, na jacha vaslo hoti, na jacha hoti bamano. Kamuna vaslo hoti, kamuna hoti bamano. Means no one becomes lower because of his birth, and no one becomes higher because of his birth. Kamuna means karma, means action. It's your action or worth that makes you lower, and it's worth that makes you higher. So it's not birth, but it's worth that matters. That's what Dr. Ambedkar said in Buddha and Karl Marx, the long essay he wrote. So he was translating the ancient message what Buddha gave in 3rd century BC, just after enlightenment of 5th week. He was translating the same spirit in Buddha and Karl Marx. So we can see how he was handling the question of caste through Buddhism.
Another question from here in the room? Yeah, Shrina.
Hi, that was brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I was really struck by what you said regarding Baker feeling let down by his fellow educated people. And I don't know exactly what the relationship was, but it really struck me because I think a lot of us are feeling in a position that education doesn't necessarily mean that you'll act in moral ways or take moral positions or even stand up for truth when truth is literally in your face. And I know I'm feeling the limits of liberalism in some really disappointing, sad, and angering ways right now.
Yeah.
And so I'm just wondering if you have a little bit of wisdom on that issue, or how can we draw inspiration from a Baker on this, and even the Buddha to be fair. Thank you.
Well, Dr. Ambedkar was interacting with a very fine mind while he was staying in Columbia University. Professor Seligman, John Dewey, Shotwell, Harvey, James Harvey, these are the sort of star names of his time, and Columbia was at its peak. We have alumni of Columbia here. So I think when he went back, he would have very probably, generally, what I think is my personal opinion, and I don't want to generalize. It's up to you to accept or reject. I'm very happy. He would have very easily settled in this country. He was in London School of Economics, and he was a very fine economist. I wouldn't. I think he would have got even Nobel Prize was nothing at that time with the work he was doing in economics. I think he was deeply aware from where he came, or how he wanted to use education, and he translated that form of education to empower people. And he said, like, for example, the reclamation of human personality, that is very deviant frame. Rules and principle, very deviant frame. He was using that in a Buddhist framework by borrowing the egalitarian values from its own civilization. So I think it's a beautiful amalgamation or entwining he was doing with the principles and the knowledge he acquired. And I think he was aspiring and expecting that from his followers. Particularly this statement he delivered, he sent 100 students abroad, and all of them settled abroad. And none of them looked behind what community was expecting, or what he aspired, and he was disheartened by that. And I'm not surprised. There is an emerging even middle class. Once you become comfortable, you sort of sucked by your comforts and lost in your luxuriousness of life. It's very difficult to keep that awareness of suffering that we come from. First level is understandable. No one would like to look back the dark past or the painful experiences. Understandable. But at the same time, as the deeper meaning of human life, if at all education makes us better person. And Dr. Ambedkar quotes Adam Smith saying that education is a dynamic force and it must transform your mind. And then he goes back to his first guru or first teacher called Jyotiba Phule, who was a great educationist. So, and Kabir, he was a great educationist. And of course, Buddha is a bit far in the history, but these are the immediate figures that he was borrowing inspiration and try to translate what education means. So I think if that turns up mere again selfish or individualistic goal, it's not other than the monastic Buddhism, much worse than that even, being a victim of consumerist materialistic society, which is anyway harming this planet.
Manan, are we having some questions there? Maybe I'll shift this laptop. So while I read these, maybe there's one more question from the audience. Yes, please, Sarah.
Yeah, I was wondering if Ambedkar had any sort of like reinterpretation of what it means to reach nirvana.
To reach nirvana?
Yeah.
So just for the online audience, the question is, what was Dr. Ambedkar's understanding of reaching nirvana? How did he interpret that?
Well, first of all, the standard definition of nirvana, if I start from that frame, when Buddha attained enlightenment, what we call bodhi or nirvana, as you said, nir means no, and van means craving, trishna, tanha, the Pali term comes. The mind destroyed the tanha means craving. That's nirvana. That's the state of nirvana where I do not have any craving. I'm not talking about desires here. That's slightly different issue, but I don't want to explore too much on Buddhist philosophy here. So that's the nirvana. So to realize that there is nothing fixed in the nature of reality. Everything is changing, and we are part and parcel or the processes of that changing evolutionary processes. That's realizing that is nirvana. So very interestingly, Dr. Ambedkar and Buddha and his Dhamma, he says that there is becoming, not being. That's how he defines nirvana. And that is dynamic. Being means in the fixed notion of self, you remain static as an identity. And if I apply that to the structure of caste or even gender or even race, if I think I am Brahmin or I am Dalit or I am black or I am white, actually I'm fixing myself to that identity. May that be privilege or underprivilege. There is no identity. So there is no Atman, but Anatman, no self. That's the realization Dr. Ambedkar was trying to say, that there is no fixed caste identity. He says in Annihilation of Caste itself, 20 years before he converted to Buddhism, all things are decomposite or changing in nature. Nashwar, the word he uses, changing. So there is no fixity. And he says, when he wrote in Buddha and his Dhamma, so I'm giving a reference of 20-25 year difference, this thought he had. He said that had there been no concept of no self, evolution is not possible. So even if I get PhD or postdoc, or I become officer or professor or millionaire, I still carry that identity in my mind, right? And if that is fixed, I will see evolution only in materialism, only in scientific development. Great to have Zoom and WhatsApp and Instagram and whatnot to communicate to the world, but it has another side too. And I think evolution, we cannot reduce down to mere materialism or mere, how can I say, a competitiveness. You see what I mean? There is also cooperation in evolution. There is also positive trends in evolution. So Dr. Ambedkar was saying that nirvana in that sense means transforming yourself into casteless mind or prejudices less mind, discrimination less mind. That's what I would define Dr. Ambedkar's definition of nirvana.
So I'm seeing we've got a number of great questions online, probably more than we'll have time for. But one here to start out with is, now that Dr. Ambedkar's image, especially in India, is very widespread and is now appearing in a lot of different places, what are your views on the pop culture representation of Ambedkarite views that we might see through rap songs or fashion, or just now Ambedkar's image being kind of everywhere? Does it end up kind of devaluing the image?
I I don't have definite response to that question to begin with. I would see the situation or the pop culture in dual way. It's good that people come to know who is this guy, how he looks like, and what he does and what he didn't do, and so on and so forth. So it's good that he is getting popular and people get to know whose t-shirt is this, what is this saying, reformation of mind and reformation of world, and so on and so forth. So it has its own positive side, but there are another side which I would respond in two ways. A is the appropriation of Dr. Ambedkar. He is getting popular. He is on every political party's banner. May that be right, left, center, no party. He is on every party's banner because his face represents justice. His face represents equality. His face represents a sort of democracy. And everyone wanted to be democratic in lip service. And well, it's not about India. That's the case with the entire world. Every politician speaks about democracy in their language. How much they are intended to bring a true democracy in the society and social experiences, I don't know. So that's the appropriation is a stake there in getting Dr. Ambedkar popular. So if it's popular with his values and teaching, great. Same with the Buddha. It comes in every like massage centers. And every airport I see Buddha. Well, great. Buddha wouldn't mind that unless you realize what he has to say. So I would sort of have that response. I don't mind Buddha gets popular in t-shirt or banner or jeans pant or notepad or your mobile phones and your DPs and so on and so forth. Great. Unless we remember what he has to say.
Well, another question here that might put you on the spot a little bit. So I'll give you maybe sort of two options. The question is, are there any of Dr. Ambedkar's views that you think you disagree with and are outdated? So just because this is a kind of public venue here, not to try to get you into trouble, maybe give you another way of thinking about this in terms of, are there areas where you think potentially Ambedkarite community could grow and do things beyond what Dr. Ambedkar said? So I'll let you answer that however you prefer. And yeah, thank you for the great question and just appreciating this as a public venue.
I don't know how to respond to that question. I read Dr. Ambedkar, and in my reading, I haven't encountered anything that is I can disagree with. Yes, there are questions, for example, about Aryan race theory, or there are questions about, for example, uh, some philosophical issues in Buddhism, which Dr. Ambedkar did not have time to address. And a lot of popular opinion is that Dr. Ambedkar did not have enough understanding of Dhamma or enough understanding of Buddhism, which I understand. But I think his role was quite different. His priorities were different, and he was not a Tripitakacharya. I mean, the Pali scholar. Of course, not Pali scholar. He was Pali scholar. He wrote dictionary of Pali, but he was not going into a Pali text to unfold their meanings and therefore bring out the scholarly outcomes like academics we all do at universities. That was not his priority. So he gave enough sort of tools and pillars to understand. Yes, he could have gone further to define, like what she asked, the Nirvana or the Bodhicitta, or what Hinayana and Mahayana and the Vajrayana, and how worship and rituals functions, because he did not live enough after embracing Buddhism. So I see that as a sort of a limitation in terms of writing on Buddhism and unfolding more Buddha's thought and the principles, Buddhisasana or councils, and there are so many issues I can sort of now dig out. Now, beyond Ambedkar, that's very important aspect of question, and thank you for asking me that, because it was not Dr. Ambedkar's one-man responsibility to give a ready-made plate in your hand. I think great responsibility lies on the followers of Dr. Ambedkar and, let's say, socially engaged Buddhists in the world, and also I would include other religions who are sort of seeking for a positive, progressive interpretation of religion that nullifies their dogmatism, fundamentalism, and the stereotypes within their own faith system. So I think this is the area that, and Dr. Ambedkar sort of the advocate of that. And I think the followers of Dr. Ambedkar or his community should represent with those ethos. And that will go, and it has to go beyond Ambedkar, objectively speaking, because Dr. Ambedkar will not define everything. He is a human like us. And so unfortunate, he encountered so many sort of health issues and could not really fulfill his dreams. So this unfinished legacy sort of lies on the shoulder of his followers. And it sort of, how can I say, it makes me happy and unhappy at times. It makes me happy because people and his followers are taking interest and communicating Dr. Ambedkar. But there are followers who say, no, no religion, Dr. Ambedkar did not believe in all this, and so on and so forth. So no religion is a big sort of problematic question there. When he say religion, he defines what religion means: liberty, equality, fraternity, no poverty, no slavery, no oppression, and it should be based on reason. So he has very clear-cut criteria. And if I say, as a human species, as a human being, if we are not translating our consciousness to something greater, something larger, something meaningful, what's the point of we being a human? If we are not aspiring something higher, something rever to. And Dr. Ambedkar has a very strong element in his thinking. He was singing Kabir's Doha. He was sort of doing Buddha Vandana. There are references in Shankarananda Shastri's writing. He was meditating sometime and he was chanting Om Mani Padme Hum. So there are very strong evidences. And I think that's what legacy, unfinished legacy, needs to go beyond what Dr. Ambedkar was expecting.
Well, what you've talked about here actually dovetails really nice with another question that's coming online. Could you speak about specific ways that Dr. Ambedkar experienced Buddhism? So especially in terms of, we had that question about nirvana, but did Dr. Ambedkar talk about what he experienced in meditation, or experienced in interacting with other Buddhists, or experienced in reading texts and in thinking about his project?
It's a great question. I never encountered that question before. I spoke so many places and for many years. So it gives me a chance to unfold that aspect of his life. Of course, he was not a monastic traditional practitioner sitting in the cave or at Buddhist center talking about meditation, and therefore exploring his spiritual experiences, if I put it that way. So he does not use that language. So, but that does not mean that he did not have spiritual experiences. There are a lot of writings and incidences where he conspicuously and obviously speaks that touched me very deeply, and I can see that's his sort of experience. Like he was sitting 18, 19 hours reading books and writing about. So he was not aiming to get another PhD or publishing his research. He was writing for people. He was researching and reading day and night in a meditative mode. Of course, he did some meditation, but even that action shows his commitment, his integrity of mind. Secondly, he said someone asked him a question, how, Dr. Ambedkar, how do you see your success? He says that unless there is a empowerment of every sentient being and every oppressed being in the world, I don't think my life is successful. That's a very bodhicitta mind. And in Buddha and his Dhamma, he writes the four vows of bodhicitta. I have a lot of limitations. Let me vow to overcome those limitations. I have so many uh, paths and ways to cover. Let me commit to overcome my limitations. There are sentient beings who are suffering. Let me commit myself to liberate them from the suffering. So that's his experience. He is writing in Buddha and his Dhamma. Of course, he's taking classical for Bodhisattva vows, but he thought that's important. And lastly, which is very sensitive experience, he said that wherever you go in the country, means in India, you will encounter the monster of caste. You will encounter the monster of caste. And I am committed to bang my head against this monster. I know my head will be bloody and I will not be able to break down that monster. But I do believe by seeing the blood, rest of my followers will join me. I think those experiences speaks a very deep quest and passion for him to liberate people. It's very wrong to put, of course, his people, his followers. I'm sort of very reluctant to use those expressions. I think a one human fought for humanity and set up an example like other great masters or leaders in the world has tried to put in. And we are encountering a very unique, complex, religiously complicated civilizational histories where we encounter this man called Dr. Ambedkar. So I think there are a lot of lessons and experiences and point of liberation that we have to learn from. And just before his death, that was 4th December, he went to Mathura Road in Delhi in Buddhist gallery. And there was various forms like Thailand, all Southeast Asian, Asian Buddha images were exhibited. So he went very closely to do all exhibitions. And he came out of it Nanak Chand Ratu, his personal assistant, and says, my Buddha is beautiful. My Buddha is beautiful. So these are the exclamations or udanas Dr. Ambedkar has uttered. So I think there are very strong seeds and germs that one can understand or infer that he has those experiences. It's not slogans or statements he was giving for sake of public. It was very personal statements.
Well, in the interest of time, maybe we'll take one more question from the audience here if you'd like, and then we can close things up and we can continue talking after we end the session. But is there one final question anybody would like to ask? Yeah, please.
It's just Dr. Ambedkar talks a lot about the caste system, of course, and I guess it's just a main focal point of what he's trying to say. And I'm just curious about how in today's age, like Ambedkarites who necessarily can't relate with the caste system and the experiences that go with that, how, I guess, do they interact with each other?
Mm-hmm. So the question is on contemporary experiences of caste today among Ambedkarites, Buddhists. Maybe safe to say in India and abroad? Maybe extend it that way?
Well, I would like to use this Isabel Wilkinson's expression, caste is a discontent. I think there is a discontent in the human society. Yes, caste manifests particularly in Indian cultural or the social context, but that discontent manifests in every community at various level. So that discontent, in other words, I would rephrase your question, what world has to learn from Dr. Ambedkar, or in that sense. So he is giving a method that uh, nullifying prejudices, or eradication of prejudices, that who am I and what I thought about myself. To rethink and revisit yourself is the message of Dr. Ambedkar. And he said that the greatest thing that Buddha taught to the world, this is Dr. Ambedkar's word, paraphrasing Buddha's word, saying that the greatest thing that Buddha taught to the world cannot be reformed unless we reform our own mind. That's what Dr. Ambedkar said. So I think there are discontent, especially caste and other forms of discontent. By reforming our own self, by reforming our own minds, and opening arms to others would be the best gesture that Dr. Ambedkar invites us to transform in. I think it doesn't matter who you are, what faith you believe in. He's not forcing someone to become Buddhist and therefore then you will liberate. I don't think there is ism that Dr. Ambedkar is emphasizing. Therefore, categorically, he says immediately after his conversion, before his conversion, there was a press conference, and question was asked: Are you going into Hinayana or Mahayana or Vajrayana? Which sect of Buddhism you are entering into? Dr. Ambedkar refused to answer. I think, address that question in the form of sectarianism. Said, I do not want to go into sect politics. You may call it a Navayana. I'm going refuge to the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. Buddha, the man who liberated, who was a historical figure, and exhibited that mind can be prejudice-less, mind can be discrimination-less. Dhamma, the teaching that reconstructs the society, that reforms the world, and brings out the new relationship among humanity or human being. That's the Dhamma. And the Sangha is a community where some people exhibit that quality of relationship, that association. And that can be in any faith, I would say. May that be Christian, Islam, Hindu, Buddhist, or any faith. I think that's the spirit Dr. Ambedkar was trying to evoke. In his particular situation, he has to sort of think the conditions of his own people. He embraced Buddhism. That's the best religion he thought of. And I'm sure, nonetheless, or however, the spirit is invited in all faiths.
Well, I think that's a great tone to finish our event on. So I'd like to thank you all for spending part of your evening with us, for coming out for this. And thank you all online for logging in. We're going to stop the recording here shortly. This event has been recorded. We're going to go back and maybe edit the video just a little bit and then send it out to anybody who is registered to view this, and potentially, maybe put it on YouTube or something, but that's, we'll make that decision later. So again, thank you all, and especially thank you, Santosh, for taking your time, being away from your classes at Harvard. Apologize to his professors whose classes he skipped out on to be here. But yeah, thank you for taking that chance to be with us. We greatly appreciate it.
I also wanted to take an opportunity to thank you, Professor John. Thank you very much for inviting me and thinking this all important issues through, which I think very close to my heart, and I'm sure close to your heart and close to many, those who are watching us and friends around here. Thank you very much for inviting me at Michigan. It's an honor to be here. And thank you very much, my friends who come here and spending your time with me. There are some literature some of our friends has brought on Buddhism and Dr. Ambedkar. If you are willing, you can have a look. If you want, you can take with it. And there are concerned person will be there catering you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's an honor.